Welcome to The Secret Witch Show, the podcast providing a safe and alchemical altar space of conversations which help powerful women escape a half-hearted, spiritless society and rediscover the freedom of living a wildly magical life. Every other week, we explore how to cast aside the wounds of shame, guilt, and fear connected with fully being yourself, so you can grant yourself permission to stop hiding, ground soulfully back into your body, illuminate your whole soul desires, tend your soul, rediscover and reclaim your powerful gifts, express your magic, and manifest your wildest alchemy. There's no better place to become who your heart longs to be. This is where we will guide you into liberation. I'm your host, Nicole Barton, and I'm so excited to dive in. Welcome back to the show, aspiring feminine healing leaders. Today's episode is a good one, so I'm going to let you dive straight in. But for now, at the moment, I am working on the archetypal remedies I'm going to be dosing this year. And I would love to invite you to follow me on Instagram and TikTok, as I've recently devoted to creating some fun reels sharing more about what we do. So if you enjoy the podcast and you'd like to hear more from me in between, follow at I am Nicole Barton on Insta and at Team Secret Witch on TikTok. I will see you there. On the Secret Witch Show today, though, our guest is Sarah Lajeuness. Sarah is a certified and award-winning coach, writer, speaker, and shmealer, shame healer, whose life's work is devoted to helping humans heal the guilt, shame, and experiences from the past that prevent them from moving forward and experiencing a greater and richer quality of life that's possible. She has witnessed the long-term damage and detrimental impacts that the weight of shame can carry if left unaddressed, from the boardroom to the bedroom and everywhere in between. In this episode, we explore the role of shame, particularly in relation to sexuality, intimacy, and pleasure, and how it can unconsciously create our lives for us if we aren't aware of it. We dive into how the core essence of who we are can be clouded by shame, and how we can begin to heal that by loving ourselves back to wholeness. Let's dive in. Welcome, Sarah. I am so excited to have you here for this conversation, and it's feeling like a really juicy one. Really feeling the power in this conversation. We've just been exploring before we begin, but so I'm excited to dive in. And I also love that we're here talking about like sexual shame, and we're recording on Valentine's Day as well. It feels quite synchronistic.
I forgot about
I know.
It's perfect. It's perfect. And I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me, Nicole. I'm also so excited about this conversation.
Yes, it's my pleasure. And I love the synchronicity between our work as well. So I would love to invite you to begin with I always make this invitation, for you to share around your journey with healing shame, and particularly around the topic that we're here to talk about, which is sexuality, intimacy, and pleasure. So does that feel like a good place for you to dive in?
Yes. Yeah, that feels wonderful. So how did I get on this journey of healing shame? My previous career was actually in professional sports. So I spent over a decade working towards the Nike headquarters in the US. And that landed me in various positions in marketing and corporate partnerships for professional football teams, and eventually the league head office here. And so I had landed myself in what you could imagine would be a number of male-dominated industries. And so what was happening is I was so obsessively focused on the development of my career and climbing, quote unquote, the corporate ladder, that I stopped making time for everything that was important to me. So family, connection, relationships, the partner that I thought I would spend the rest of my life with, we had to part ways because of my inability to be off my phone and focused on, the upcoming games or whatever, health, wellness. And I think part of that was being in an environment in which I felt like I didn't belong. One of the few females, and we talked a bit about, the masculine versus the feminine before we jumped on here, but feeling like emotion, my femininity, just tears in general, emotion in general, just didn't belong at this table. And I was actually told by a number of mentors, wear all black, put your hair up, constant. It was kind of like beat the feminine out of you in order to succeed in this industry. You have to be very serious. And I remember actually going to my manager one time, and it was very high stress. There were, probably a month period there where I was working until 2 a.m., getting up at 5, trying to get to the gym before I went to work. So this very kind of intense, masculine driven energy. And I remember just collapsing in his office one day, like crying, like, I can't do this. And, thinking that he's going to care and he's going to demonstrate empathy, and he's going to say, how can we figure this out together, Sarah? I remember he just looked at me with no emotion, and said, Sarah, if this is your response, because I was crying, if this is your response, I don't know that you're cut out for this work. And so every part of me just like collapsed, thinking, okay, it's, this part this work that I've spent so long trying for. And so, I said, okay, well, beat out the emotions. That doesn't exist. Just continue to like hammer out and force your way through. And I believe that the universe will give us wake up calls, whether we like to hear and receive them or not. So mine had to work extra hard and keep on giving me the same message, where by the age of 24, I was winning awards. I was being approached by different sports teams and leagues. I got the top 5 under 25 to watch in the sports business industry across Canada. And so on the surface, I looked successful. I looked like I had things figured out. And inside, every single morning, I felt isolated, deeply depressed, and constantly in question of what is my purpose. And if this is what life is about, I don't want it. But even at a deeper level, not even just I don't want the success, but I don't even want to be here. And so it was this really big wake up call. And again, the universe was like, okay, you're still not getting the message, Sarah. So finally, severe anxiety attacks. I was wearing heart monitors strapped to my chest. And finally I collapsed on a yoga studio change room floor. And I remember they helped me to the back, and I was sitting on this couch, and one of the yoga instructors was like dabbing a wet washcloth across my forehead. And I remember, that same sort of message, like, I can't survive this, going this route. So I knew it was something different. And through my own, reaching out, I was trying to figure out, okay, what sort of modalities, I tried everything. I eventually worked with a coach, and I started to see the shift, or I started to witness the power of, especially on the days when we don't believe in ourselves. And for me, I was at such a low state in my life. It made the world of a difference to have someone in my corner who believed in me on the days when I didn't believe myself. So that set me on this path of, okay, exploring coaching. I did my certification. And I felt that while it was a wonderful program that I did, there was still something wrong with me. And I'm sorry, I have to warn you in advance, Nicole, my stories go on long tangents, but I'm going to answer your question.
We're here for it.
Yeah, good. Okay. And I just remember thinking, okay, my work doesn't feel like the traditional structure of coaching of what's being taught in this and what I'm seeing online. And it just, every time I, again, tried to force myself into this world of doing the right things and doing, the courses and all this stuff. And not that any of that is wrong or right or good or bad. It was just, this doesn't feel right to me. And I feel like I need even more help. And so someone at the time, so again, another kind of existential crisis. Okay, well, if it's not this, then what? My partner at the time introduced me to this gentleman who, he said, he helped my buddy when he had multiple concussions. He helps people when they're depressed. He helps people with their business. I don't exactly know what he does, but he's the guy that you call when nothing else works. So I book a ticket. I have no idea who this is. I book a ticket to Boston because he started all of his work with about 10-hour day in person. So you're not hiding anything. You're getting the root of things. You can't hide from this. So I get there expecting, this, and we joke about this now, expecting this big, like 7-foot boisterous guy, the Tony Robbins archetype, thundering, like comes into the room, clapping, getting all riled up. And he's this short, bald man with a tacky Hawaiian t-shirt and these socks, these cargo short. And again, he makes fun of me just as much. But I remember just looking at him, and like I had done for the previous, 20 plus years of my life, I plastered a smile on my face and I said, oh yeah, it's nice to meet you. How are you? And he looks me straight in the eyes and he said, how long have you been fooling people with a smile on your face that doesn't reach your eyes?
Mm.
And so I just began, initially, I'm kind of like defensive, like, who is this guy? And all of a sudden I just started crying. And I just wept because I felt for the first time in my life, maybe I had truly been seen, or maybe this was a safe space where this guy actually understands that despite all this external success, despite all like the forcing my way through life, I felt so deeply unfulfilled and depressed and like questioning again the existence. What is my purpose here? And so it was only working through him, and he's been a mentor now for 7 years, where I'm doing these full days. I sometimes do 30 days with him once a year. Like we're going like 6 to 8 hours a day, but everything is about deeply going into your psyche, the physical, the psychological, the emotional, the spiritual healing of all of these layers over time that has pushed us away from who we truly are. And like what we were talking about, that core essence of who we are, which is over time blocked and disconnected by deep layers of shame and guilt. And so that was something that I really learned from him, was just how powerful all of the weight of the shame and the guilt that we can carry, and how detrimental that can be. I say from the boardroom to the bedroom and everywhere in between. It impacts so many, every single arena in our life. And it was really through that work that I started to be able to actually witness. It wasn't adding things. It wasn't fixing me. It wasn't like I was broken. It was, we just need to excavate the actual natural state of who you are, your authentic self, by healing these layers that have added up like layers of an onion over time. And when I realized how deeply powerful that process was, it became very clear to me this was the medicine that I was here to serve as well.
That is so gorgeous. I'm just wondering where to dive in.
Yeah, that was a lot.
So much of that, but I'm loving.
Probably work on concising that story. That's the full journey.
I am loving you and your message so much. There's firstly, what stood out to me is like the wake up call thing, and you've got quite a similar journey to mine in many ways. Like I was very much burned out from working in corporate. So I totally related to that. And I think many of our women will. That's usually the journey that they have also had. So yeah, that makes so much sense. And yeah, I could feel like it kind of went through me when you said about them beating the feminine out of you. That was, yeah, I was like, oh yeah, there's so much in there. But I think where I'd love to go first is if we could speak to a little bit more. I think firstly, like, what is shame? Maybe even just speaking a little bit to what is shame, and then I would love to dive into the onion a little bit more.
Absolutely. And I know your question also touched on how does that lead into the sexual shame, and obviously we'll explore more of that as well. And what I have found is if shame shows up in someone's life, it isn't as easy or as simple as to compartmentalize the areas that shame. I worked with a professional or a personal trainer once, and I remember him saying, okay, so what do you want to work on? And I was like, oh, like I just want stronger arms, or like maybe a flatter stomach, all of these things. And he's like, Sarah, weight loss isn't just like, it doesn't just go specific to one body part, right? It affects all of you. You can't just pick and choose where you want to lose this. I was like, oh, okay. It's exact same principle with shame.
Yes.
So, where I see it, yes, we can call it sexual shame, we can call it financial shame, we can call it relationship shame, whatever it is, but shame. And so going back to your question of how would I define it? Ultimately, it is a state in which someone feels unworthy, not enough, or unlovable exactly as they are. That requires them to seek approval, validation, or to have those basic fundamental human needs, to feel loved, to feel approved of, to feel validated. It gets them to a point where they need to have that sourced externally. And in that state, it's never sustainable. It will never last. And so when it's you're living in a state of shame, and that is what's driving all of our beliefs, our behaviors, our actions. It's not conscious, it's not logical, but we will compromise who we are. We will come, there's an author called Dr. David Hawkins, who created this map of, I don't know if you've heard of him, he created a calibrated scale of human consciousness. And he talks about how shame and guilt are actually the heaviest of all emotions. And whichever emotion we live or exist in most often, that will connect to our worldview of how we view humanity, how we view ourselves, how we view a godlike figure, if we believe in one. And then that ultimately leads to what is the process of how we show up in the world. And so with shame, it's one in which it's a hateful or vengeful God. It's where you think that people hate you. It's where you actually hate yourself, to the point that the only natural, because everything has to come out into a physical manifestation, the only possible path in that space is harming towards yourself or towards other people, or often both. So that's where you know, anything from bulimia to anorexia to addictions, portage to everything. The only natural spot when we don't love ourselves, or when we don't believe we're worthy of love, then leads to self-harm in whatever mechanism we choose.
Yeah, I really, really resonate with that. It's very much in alignment with what I teach as well, and so ties into like the witch wound, which is all about us hiding our self-expression because we're shaming who we really are, and fearing using our true voice and being who we are. So I love that you shared that. A piece there that you talked about, and I'm wondering whether to go to the onion first, but another piece that I want to speak to, because again, it's something that is very much in alignment with my own message. Is you said about how this shame isn't always conscious, and so I think there's a piece there to talk to, like, how do we make it conscious and how do we begin to heal it?
Beautiful. So I'm going to tell a story that kind of encapsulates that one. I had a client who, she fell in love. She thought this guy was her soulmate, and vice versa. And so after a few months, they've been together, they decide, okay, now's the time we're going to be intimate. So for the first time, they're intimate. And afterwards, they're lying together, you know, wrapped in each other's arms. They're looking at each other lovingly. And she sees all of a sudden his lips part. And she's like, oh my gosh, is he going to say these, you know, those 3 words on Valentine's Day? It's so exciting, right? Is it this 3 words that, you know, I thought the first time I saw him, but you know, whatever, I held off because I'd be crazy, whatever. So she's waiting for this. And in that moment, he grabs her bottom and is a chunk of her flesh and says, we got to beefing up this booty. We got to get you on a program. In her most vulnerable state, she's nude, right? Notice how he's saying that after the deed. He's not saying that before, right? He's smart. And in that moment, like her whole self just crumbled. She wanted to, of course, everything in my most vulnerable state, the story that I've always been told and that I've always told myself that I'm not enough, it was triggered. And so her natural response was, oh my gosh, I got to get on a program. I got to beefing up this booty, then I'll be enough. And in previous relationships, that is what happened. She had been given time and time comments about her body. Obviously, there's shame wrapped all over that. And she can't even show up in a full self-expression. Of course, when we're talking about shame around pleasure, it impacts all of it. It's not safe to actually be open and receptive to pleasure. She can't even be in a moment of like presence and feel that she enjoys this when there's this constant state of my body is not enough. And so she's, you know, in the past, those comments were allowed to happen because it met a belief that she already had about herself. Fortunately, we had been working together for a good period of time where she said to the guy, if you ever talk about my body that way, it will be the last time you see it. Now, the relationship did not last because, again, when you're in a state of shame, it's a worldview. And that man was in such a state of shame. She told me a bit about his past. He's the younger of 2 brothers, not as financially successful, you know, a lot of shame from the father past. So in that state, we can only be harmful. Every harmful, hurtful, and hateful act comes from a state of shame towards others, towards ourselves. If only I could have worked with a guy, right? Like we could, you know, she said, I have a shmealer. I know this guy, whatever. He didn't want it because, again, something external, when you're in a state of shame, something external has to be at fault. Something external has to be the problem. So that's why when you see couples, we're often not coming from a place of unconditional love and trust and compassion towards one another. We're coming from a state of blame. They have to be the problem as opposed to we need to clean up, you know, the crap internally. So again, tying back to your question of how do you start becoming aware? She didn't even know that was violating her sense of self. those comments. She had been so used to it. And that's what I see a lot with clients, whether it's the way they show up in relationships, or even whether or not a mutually respectful and loving relationship in which their needs can also be met exists. A lot of people don't even believe that that's possible, what they've witnessed with their parents, what they've witnessed in other relationships growing up. So it really is about opening up to, okay, but I'm worthy and deserving of something that's deeply loving and respectful. And the journey is the willingness to sit in the ambiguity. Even though I've never seen such a beautiful relationship, deep down, I know, and I must trust that something more beautiful than what I've experienced exists. So this journey requires so much trust, so much surrender into, because people want to stay in the comfort. That's the hardest part of the journey, is I want to stay in what's known. That's why domestically violent relationships, a lot of people tend to actually go back to a domestically abusive relationship. It's what's known, it's familiar. It's not consciously logical. It doesn't make sense, but this is what's known. This is comfort.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And one of the things that I love about you talking to there as well is that we're kind of we always think of like manifestation as this thing to do, but one of the things that I'm passionate about teaching is like we're already manifesting like all of the time. It's just and if we are not creating what we want to create, it's because we're manifesting from this shame, from this shadow. That's like the perfect example of that story that you were just sharing feels like the perfect example of that to me. So I wonder if you've got anything to add around that.
yeah and I think that's beautiful. And I think it's also and I mean, going back to her, she eventually had to make the choice if she were, and I remember when she told me this, it was one of the most beautiful things. She knew that if she continued in that container, she would be compromising all of the work that she had done on herself. And so despite actually feeling like this person was her soulmate, despite being so head over heels in love with him, she knew that it was not a container in which she could continue her journey back to her highest and truest version of herself if her self-worth was constantly being put into question. And so that's the thing. We try to fix people, we try to change people, but we don't understand how deeply rooted someone's worldview is. And when you're operating from that state of not enoughness, of shame, of guilt, of whatever that looks like, it doesn't matter how often people try to change you or fix you. This is actually how you view the world, humanity, and yourself. It goes so much deeper. And then we internalize that. We say, well, if only I was enough, if only my booty was bigger. And in that state, again, those were initially the type of relationships because, and what I believe is, again, going back to what you were talking about in terms of the constantly creating, constantly manifesting, whichever or whatever our worldview is, that's what we will accept and ultimately expect in our life. So this work is about fundamentally shifting what someone accepts and ultimately expects in their life, because it goes from a space of scarcity, of lack, of not enoughness, of relationships in which you aren't actually honored or revered or loved or respected or anything, into what I believe is our natural state of order. And if we're coming from that place of unconditional love for ourselves, we're not going to choose, or whether it's accept or expect, a relationship that's harmful, that's hurtful, that's hateful. And that's a fundamental and a very important part of the journey, because without that, I can't just, walk into and meet a new client and say, okay, and there are a million books about it. There are a million positive quotes on the internet that say, oh, you deserve the best, and accept the love you think you deserve. And okay, great, I'm going to go out in the world and I'm just going to accept really great love. But we're dealing with a surface level symptom and not the underlying worldview of, I am actually not worthy of something more beautiful than what I'm experiencing. And that's where all of the work begins.
I so agree with that. And what we're essentially talking to in the language I would use is the kind of underlying shadow. When you talk about that kind of worldview, I love the language that you're putting to that. But it's, for me, the language I would use is like the deep shadow that we've kind of shamed and pushed to the side, so that it's and that's essentially what's been creating for us. And I think in many ways these incidents, like you were just speaking to that woman, it's like the material for our liberation, really. We can kind of begin to unpack all the shame that is creating for us. So I love that story. Just wondering where to go next. I keep wanting to revisit this onion.
You want me to explain the onion?
Yeah, well, it's just so synchronistic because this is very much the lineage of my own path, is this idea that we like who we are born as is our core essence, and then we have these layers of trauma, which I guess you would call shame, that kind of get built around this essence and kind of cloud our true essence from being seen. So yeah, I just wondered if you could talk a little bit to that, and yeah, the way that you see the layers as well.
Yeah, beautiful. And not just shame, it can be guilt, it can be any disempowering emotion. And so I believe that shame and guilt are two of the heaviest, and internal, right? There's obviously a lot of external barriers in the world that keep many humans in disempowering situations. But in terms of the internal emotions, shame and guilt are fundamentally the two heaviest that keep us in unwanted or disempowering situations and circumstances. So that's the core of the work that I do with people. It's identifying it's shame, it's guilt, it's what are the other existing. I just find that shame is the most heavy. So if we can target that and start releasing that first, there's immediate, release, there's lightness, there's just a different, when we go back to that worldview, it's just a different outlook of the world. When we realize how long we've been carrying this weight that we never should have in the first place. So the way I describe it is, and we were touching on this before we press live, but I will draw in all of the workshops, all of the, even with a client, I will do this drawing. It's a very powerful visualization that can maybe for the first time ever demonstrate from a visual, like, right, we're linear beings and many of us are very visual learners. It can sometimes be the first visual representation of how heavy the emotional burden of shame and guilt have been that we've been carrying over our life. And so I draw the circle and okay, so that's our core essence. That's how we're born in our natural state of order. We're unconditional love, both towards ourselves, towards others. It's a space of infinite creativity, of possibility, of hope, of compassion, of empathy, right? It's a baby in its natural state. The childlike consciousness is untouched. You can describe it as kind of like the hardware of a computer. It's untouched in its perfection. But over time, it's the software that gets programmed, which can be hateful, bigoted, racist, whatever it is, sexist, whatever sort of, hateful stories. But if you take that software out, the natural state is actually one of unconditional love. But over time, people of influence or authority figures in our life, it can be well-intentioned or not, parents, siblings, lovers, coaches, teachers, religious institutions, whatever, over time can start instilling these beliefs that we're not enough exactly as we are. We need something outside of us in order to be enough. And we start to lose that core essence of who we truly are. And so over time, it's like little layers of an onion to suddenly, and I'll give a story, this woman, right when she was born, her mother got breast cancer, lost a breast. In her mind, because she had this daughter and it triggered this illness, the daughter's existence was the reason why the woman got sick, was the reason why she lost her femininity. Her body didn't look the same. All of this led to, and I mean, it goes so much deeper than that, but at that time, the father sought the arms of another woman. For love and comfort. His wife didn't look the same. She wasn't as attracted to him, all of the things. So at a very young age, without even, again, consciously us realizing it, this woman has a belief that my existence led to disease, to illness, to the destruction of the family unit, led to my father not actually even being with the woman that he actually wanted to be, and my mother's heartbreak, all of these things. Fast forward several years, there's infidelity, there's betrayal in relationships. I was cut from this basketball team and this happened. And so every single thing adds up like layers of an onion. She comes to me because she wants her economics to improve. She wants her health to improve. She wants discipline with drinking ingredient smoothies and going to the gym. She wants to be able to actually show up online and promote her business. And she wants a deeper, more loving relationship. And she doesn't realize that all of it has this root in this deeply seated belief that her mere existence causes pain and is unworthy and is unlovable. And so when you start to realize just how deep this goes, like if people just realized the detrimental impacts that shame and guilt can have in our life, are our world would shift fundamentally from a perspective of health, of love, of openness, of compassion, of empathy. And so we build these layers up for such a period of time, you hit this breaking point. And that's when people reach out to me, or that's when we hit a rock bottom, so to speak. And, people start to seek out help, whatever it is. But I call it the 4 Ds: disease, depression, death, or divorce. So that's the point where someone's like, okay, someone can say, okay, something needs to shift, or it feels like a rock, whatever it is. So we've hit this point, and we live in a society where we want to deal with the surface level symptom. Well, someone's sick, there's bulimia, anorexia, let's put her in a rehab, let's take it, or he has alcohol addiction, let's take away the bottle, let's put him in a place for 90 days, hallelujah, he's safe. And we haven't dealt with all of the layers of shame over time that has led someone to believing they needed some sort of form of escapism or vice or something to escape the deep internal state of suffering that I don't belong, I'm not enough, I'm not lovable.
I love that you said that. It was actually something that I was going to talk to you about in the fact that so many of my women as well also feel this kind of pull towards the quick fixes, and in my experience, it's definitely not a quick fix that is going to be the medicine. So I love that you've shared that. It's like, so again, it comes back to that kind of masculine way our society has been conditioned that things work. And if you look to the mainstream medical system, you can see why we expect that healing is going to be really quick and fast. And yet actually it is in fact I call it the difference between woo light and woo deep. Like woo light, we're kind of interacting with magic in a really kind of light, fluffy way that's like, oh, this will be a quick fix. Whereas the work that I do is very much the woo deep, where we're going deep into these layers of shame that want love in order for us to be able to really fully express who we were born as, in essence.
Beautiful. And this woman, you could see all of the, like when we talk about sex and intimacy and pleasure, she's not the one getting off in the bedroom, right? She's making sure that the man is dealt with, he's taken care of, he's pleased. Okay. She's not charging what she's actually worth. She doesn't even know what she's worth, so she can't even acknowledge it. When she's having conversations with clients, she doesn't even have the confidence or understanding of her worth. So therefore, she feels that she actually like repels people from coming into the doors. She can't develop a deeper connection with other women, even like build a strong sense of community. Again, when you're operating from this worldview that my existence was an inconvenience and caused pain and harm, and I'm not even worthy of, again, it's going to show up everywhere.
Yeah, I love that too. There's often, again, this is one of the ways this shows up for our witches actually, is that they will often kind of compartmentalize, as you were talking about, into thinking that, well, over here's their soul gifts or their spiritual gifts, and over here's like their personal life, or, and there's this distinct separation between like me as a person and me and my business. When in reality, and this is a big part of the message that I share, like our medicine is really us going into like the deepest, darkest core wounds that we've got, which is one of those layers of the onion that's like the deepest one, and healing that so that we can then dose that medicine and that we have learned, that we have integrated for ourselves into the world. And really it's all one. It's all like, there's no, I'll just heal this piece. It's like there's the underlying kind of deep beliefs that kind of run through everything, all of life.
Yeah.
So yeah,
absolutely.
loving that you shared that.
And I think that, again, when you go back to that quick fix and a lot of the marketing that exists in the world, there are multi-billion-dollar industries that profit and depend on people remaining in disempowered states and believing they're not enough.
Yes.
Right. From plastic surgery to cosmetics to whatever it is. Again, it's not making anything wrong or right, good or bad, but when you're talking about these layers, it's also the conditioning from the media. So people are dealing with so many things over time, and it's actually exhausting. We don't realize how heavy this is. So then when New Year's resolutions only last until January 4th, or when we don't have the energy, or we say, I'm so undisciplined, I'm so lazy, I didn't have the time to do this, we don't realize that actually what we're dealing with are years, decades, even generations of the shame of this belief of I'm not enough. And that belief systems requires energy. And so instead of
so
saying, oh
true.
my gosh, I made it to January 3rd, this is fantastic, might just take a day off and I'll start again on January 5th. That's a much different energetic space. And oh, damn, I knew it. I'm just so undisciplined. I'm so lazy. I'm so pathetic, blah, blah, blah. That's more layers.
I love
Therefore,
that.
more
It's like there's the one thing that I say again is like it's ultimately really like the exhaustion is often like goes unexplained when you go into the mainstream medical system. But the way I see it is that if we're exhausted, it's because somewhere we're in suppression of our soul, and ultimately that is always coming down to shame or some kind of thing that's having us suppress who we really are. So I love that you've shared that way.
Yeah. And even for your listeners, when you talk about just women feeling called to do beautiful healing work in the world, or whatever they feel is like their sole purpose, that may be the biggest area where they may be compromising part of who they are, because there may be more shame around or more belief system. I heard it well, like, that being an entrepreneur, you're never going to be able to, save up for retirement. It's not sustainable, like, or, all of these things. So it can just be a heavier area. But yes, I typically then see that kind of carried out into different areas. But again, going back to when we try to deal with like the surface level symptom of, okay, just show up more on social media and then your business will be fine. It's like that's what some people have come to me for. Just help me like show up, come up with like a marketing plan. When you actually realize, again, going back to that one example that I had, it goes so much deeper, where when we start tending to and healing some of those wounds, the woman can market like a genius. But she shows up fully. And so it's not about adding more to-dos. It's about releasing this heavy burden. The sun is always there. We just hold an umbrella up and block it. So it's not about adding like, oh, we need to add sun, we need to add more light. The lightness is always there, despite us being able to see it or not. No, we just have to remove what is blocking or what is preventing that light from actually coming in. And then the rest of the things start to naturally unfold.
Yes, I love that. It's why I typically work with women with healing the shame around the witch wound, because it is one of the things that will stop a woman just from being the fullest expression of her medicine. I'm wondering if we can speak a little bit too, particularly given the topic, sexuality, intimacy and pleasure, and the way that shame around these things can show up.
How can they not show up? So I gave that example again. I gave that example of we got to beefing up this booty thing. And you can start to see how that again was just the surface level symptom of all of these experiences over time in which she felt like she was never enough. There was a woman who reached out to me. I have a vastly different approach to my work with client. Yes, we have our scheduled calls, but I'm also someone that's like on call. So for whenever these shame spirals start to occur, I love when you said loving back to wholeness. It's like immediately we can kind of, stop that shame, stop the unworthiness, because I think a lot of us keep hold of that for hours, days, sometimes months at a time, right? So it's about stopping it immediately when it arises. So this woman called me one time, and she was she was like whispering, and she's like, Sarah, like, I'm so embarrassed. And I was like, what's going on? Are you safe? Are you okay? It was a Saturday morning. And she's like, I went home with a guy yesterday. And I was like, oh, like, we're safe. Or are you okay? And yeah, it was consensual. It was great. We had a lot of fun. She had been in a relationship for 10 years in which she never felt fully seen or appreciated. And so it was a big, and it's, my work is often about bringing people together. It's not about separating people, but sometimes stepping into that higher, more empowered state can come at a cost. And so she had walked away from this relationship. And she wakes up the next morning and she's like, I am such a slut. She comes from a religious background. She shared from people, she slept with now 2 men in her entire life. First was her high school sweetheart that she married. And she's like, oh my gosh, I'm just such a slut. I just met the guy. Like, oh my gosh, we had some drinks. And I was like, did you enjoy yourself? And she's like, well, yeah, it was so much fun, but like, all this stuff. And so she's like telling me all these things. And I have another woman who that's her idea of a Thursday night. She stays, she wears protective. She like comes to the calls like, Sarah, I learned this new move. I'm like, no, I don't need to. But like, right. So at what point does someone become a slut? Is it after 2? Is it after 13? Is it after 55? there is no line. There is no right or wrong or good or bad. And so when we start to make ourselves wrong for things, that's where the damage can start occurring. That's when this separation from ourselves, because one can show up in her ultimate glory of, yes, I'm worthy and deserving of pleasure and how wonderful. And this is how I let loose. And I'm just here to like welcome all of the pleasure and the love. And, you know, she's telling men, you stay down there until the job's done. Right. And she loves it. She can't get enough. But the other is just, you know, so there's a freedom, there's a liberation that can occur when we stop making ourselves wrong for pleasure. And that's a huge thing that I see with women, is this inability, this unwillingness to feel worthy and deserving of pleasure, of goodness, of joy.
Yes. And I'm wondering if you can
go ahead.
I'm wondering if you can speak to the importance of pleasure as well, because the way I see it is that, like, if we're here to truly create from the feminine and create juicy lives, then we need to be able to feel pleasure.
Mm-hmm. And it's our natural state of order. We're not meant to suffer through life. We're not meant to grin and bear it and just endure. We are meant to feel deep pleasure and joy and happiness and an inner peace and quiet confidence that's so indestructible. It doesn't matter what goes on around us. Our worthiness is not linked to anything external. That's our natural state of order. Most people have never been taught that, told that, or encouraged to explore that, or have a way to get back to that natural state of order. So, you know, this woman that I have, she yeah, this is good. She was with someone for a few years who was disgusted when she had her period and refused to be intimate. And this is a common thing, right? But again, we don't realize the messaging that is giving is, you in 25% of your life is disgusting. You're unworthy of me touching you for 25% of your life because of what's going on. So now we've done all of these things to get rid of the period and avoid it. And we don't talk about it. And we've shamed the entire situation. So it's not surprising that there are women who actually, you know, they're deeply embarrassed. It is shame. We're unlovable during this time of the month. Of course he doesn't want it. So she's coming out of this relationship and she had this conversation with me and she's like, Sarah, I think I had the most liberating sexual experience of my life the other night. And I was like, okay, like dive in. And on her period, you know, with this man, and he could not get enough. I won't go into all of the gory details. I didn't ask for him, but she said, and she was blocking him. She's pushing him away. She's like, no, I'm on my period. And he's like, so, and he's so deeply confused. What's going on? He's like, no, like, you're so beautiful. Like, no, like, let's do this. And she opened up and expressed, because again, another thing that shame can do is we can just reject and push people away rather than entering into those courageous conversations of how other people can create a psychologically safe space for which we can heal. And so her natural instinct was, I need to stop this. He's going to be so disgusted. But instead, you know, in our work, okay, well, Sarah tells me to go into, you know, like buffalo, enter into the storm. They don't try to avoid it. They like head first. She's like, okay, I'm going to be a buffalo. I'm going to like have this courageous conversation. She's like, look, I would love to, but I have to let you know, like, this what's going on. It's this time of month. And I was in a previous relationship where this was disgusting. He wanted nothing to do with me. And the guy just like looks her dead in the eyes and he's like, well, he was a fucking fool. And she like, at no point, she's like, I have never been so turned on. So again, it goes back to what is right versus wrong in the right container. I'm not saying that sex on a period is right for everyone. I'm not saying that because some people don't prefer it. It's not making anything right or wrong. But it's always coming back to, why am I making myself wrong in my natural human state? And pleasure is fundamental to our human experience. It was a gift we were given. Why, and we spend so long actually feeling guilty. I had a woman the other day reach out and say, Sarah, I was so embarrassed. She's beautiful, you know, one of the bravest and most courageous human beings that I've ever met. If you heard her story. And she said to me, I was so embarrassed following one of our, I do these soul sessions, these full day in person. She says, following that for 2 days, I felt more joy than I've ever felt in my life. I don't think I've ever experienced joy, because of the words that you said to me, because of compliments you gave me. And so for 2 days, she calls them compliments. I call them, I'm just actually reflecting the truth of who she is. That's why it feels good, because it's true. So for 2 days, she was just on cloud nine. She was high. It was pleasure. She was open to all sorts of things. She was feeling so deeply joyful. And on the third day, she's like, I realized how pathetic I was, that I needed you to tell me things in order to feel good. And it was like, how interesting, not pathetic, how wonderful that for 2 days you were more connected to your natural state of order than maybe you've ever been in your life. You were open to joy and pleasure and unconditional love, and you could see yourself clearly. And how interesting, on day 3, you made yourself wrong for that. You made yourself wrong for feeling good and joyful and pleasurable. And that's what a lot of the human experience, or the human existence, what we do is we make pleasure wrong, or we make joy wrong, or we say, oh no, suddenly things are feeling good. It's just a matter of time before the other shoe drops. So we have to like look for all of the threats, as opposed to being like, okay, amazing, this feels good. This, like, I can get on board with this feeling. And like, how can I continue to let this flow? I have a joke with one of my clients where he's like, again, he comes from a background where he saw a lot of volatile relationships. And so that was his experience. He saw abuse and harm growing up with his parents. So that's what he created. That was the norm. Where now, so he got out of a relationship that was quite disempowering for him. And we made a joke, like, it's just a matter of time. If you're open, if you trust this process, just women are going to be like women who are working on their healing, they're compassionate, they're empathetic. They'll like see you for how, beautiful you truly are. They're going to be banging down the door. You're going to have to like beat women away with a stick. It's just a joke. And so, so all of a sudden, he's in this incredibly beautiful relationship. And so much so that this woman reaches out. It was the most beautiful email I ever received. And she's like, thank you for refusing to let him settle for a love that he didn't actually truly deserve. And for someone who could actually see him clearly. And so his natural response, in a state of love and pleasure and joy, we spend a lot of time saying, okay, no, you're safe. This is, allow this to be good, because he goes to a place of, but what I know is pain. What I know is pain in relationships, and it isn't supposed to feel this good, and I don't necessarily trust it. And that's that journey that we talk about. Is pleasure is important, joy is important, and it's our natural state of order. But a lot of us just don't trust that it is our natural state of order, but it is deeply, fundamental part of our healing too. It's when we're willing and open to like, oh my gosh, what, you're into this while I have my period? This is remarkable. Like, what goodness is this? Like, where have you been all my life? She wasn't open to it. At that time, she didn't think she was worthy.
That's so gorgeous, and it really resonates. There's definitely a story within the witch of like not being worthy of joy. So I really relate to that, and I think lots of our listeners will as well. I'm wondering if you can share a little bit more around the kind of process you work with for healing this shame.
So I have a very contrarian approach. Some people call my methods batshit crazy, just so you're aware. So, people go, even like the process of actually like exploring, I do a free call or whatever. I actually ask people to do a questionnaire, and it's like deep, hard hitting and uncomfortable questions. So we're going, like you said, and I so appreciate that your work is about, you called it woo deep. I love that, because it's like, actually, we're not dealing with surface level symptoms. These are like deep things that are driving our subconscious, our beliefs, our behaviors, everything. So initially I would just do calls and whatever. And I realized, even with my work with my mentor, how powerful it is to be in the psychological safety, or a judgment-free container, and in person with someone. So that's why I do, they're 8 hours, they're 10 hours. Sometimes they're 2 days if people have the courage to come back the next day. And we're exploring and actually identifying what is that worldview, until we actually understand, I'm not worthy of love. I'm not worthy of economics. I'm not worthy of joy. I'm not worthy of pleasure. That can't shift. And a big piece of it is also understanding and having the courage to hold a mirror up to your face and seeing, how is my own shame and insecurities causing other people to become disempowered. And I think that's a big piece that our society misses. We focus on external blame, and if only they fix, and if they do this, and if he finally empties the dishwasher, and if she just has sex with me one more time this week or whatever, then it's okay. As opposed to, we can't fix, we can't change. That's a place of force, not true inner power. It's the most important part of the process is the willingness and the self-responsibility of, what do I have to clean up in my life so I can show up from a more unconditionally loving space.
That's so gorgeous. Yeah, there's again, a lot of the work that I do is about like reclaiming feminine power. Um, so that speaks to me of that that kind of owning of our own, yeah, our own shadow as well. Um, Let me just feel where to go next.
I actually have a story on that, a really powerful story, if
Oh,
you don't mind me sharing.
yes, please
Uh,
do.
it ties in so beautifully. Again, like when you ask that question, what is it that I do? Is I hold people's feet to the fire. So it's not, I never tell
Mm,
someone to do it. It's not right or wrong. It's, things that there can be so much deep shame about, whether someone has the abortion or not. I don't care what it is. It's society that has deemed something wrong or right, good or bad. Our work is constantly coming back to what is in alignment with your highest and truest self, without any judgment. And I will be in your corner every step of the way. And I think what a lot of us don't realize is there are many human beings that have actually never experienced an unconditionally loving space, sometimes not even from their
yes.
parents. It's conditional. Someone, when she scored goals, she got love from her parents. As someone who was an Olympic athlete, she got love and approval when she did good. When she didn't, it was, all hell broke loose in the house. You're wasting your talent, you're wasting your money, all these things. It's a conditional love. And something that I see even in a lot of the work that I do with men, and sometimes I do work with couples, there can be so many containers or so many relationships in which we don't actually even feel that um, non-judgmental space, with the power of creating just this idea where nothing is good or wrong or right or anything. It's who are you? How do we continue to pull that out? And so I started working with this one gentleman, and again, there was, he saw a lot of tumultuous relationships growing up with his parents. He actually played in the NHL. I don't know if you guys know that what that league is. It's just a hockey league over here.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, the love that he received was when he scored the goal, when he scored the, all of these things. It was completely based on his performance. And so if he didn't do well, he would hear about it from his family members. So what he learned at a very young age was, if I don't receive love, I just have to push harder. I just have to force my way through this. It's completely linked to performance, but it's always my fault. I'm the one to blame. So fast forward into every relationship that he entered into, he was always the one to blame. And in that say, okay, well, if there's infidelity, it's because I wasn't making enough money. If there's affairs or whatever, it's because I didn't perform as well as I should, or I didn't give her all of the sex that she wanted. Doesn't matter that he was with a sex addict at one point, where he can't be satiated, by the way, but it's my own fault. It's my own fault. So you continue all of these layers of I'm not enough, I'm never enough, I'm never. This man is in such a state of intense inner turmoil. He's not lovable. He matches with this woman who wanted him to get more muscular, wanted him to make more money, want to do this, that, and the other thing. Nothing he did was good enough. And of course, he didn't question her. It's, no, this is my worldview. I'll shoulder this blame. I will muscle through. I'll give myself 1,000 lashes again tonight and on to the next day. Fortunately, I had the opportunity to work with her. And so what we uncovered was that she, and again, this is so fundamental to our relationships, to the power of partnership, to understanding the power of having our own accountability, of cleaning up our own crap. When she was, I don't know, I think 13 or 14, her father tried committing suicide. She saved him. She thought, okay, this will bring us together. All of these things, all of these beliefs, it will be closer than we've ever been before. And instead, the father just resented her, was so angry that his daughter kept her around for longer than he actually wanted to be. He continued to resent her, hate her, wouldn't even speak to her for 3 years until he actually succeeded in doing the job. Okay. So she's a bit older, but her father's gone. And at a ripe young age, it's such a powerful relationship between the father and the daughter dynamic. And it's like so much to our worthiness of pleasure, of love, of all of that. We just realized, and we rely so heavily on it. She has an underlying belief already that 50% of the population, so the men in the world, cannot be trusted. It's only a matter of time before the other shoe drops. It's only a matter of time before they leave me and see me for who I truly am, which is unlovable. The person that was supposed to love me couldn't even stick around for me because I was that unlovable. So she's entering into relationships seeking out blame. It makes sense why they aligned. He needs the blame. She needs to point it somewhere. I had the pleasure of working with them. I've been working with them both and now for a couple of years. So I'm so grateful for the opportunity. But the first call I ever had with her, and again, this is going back to having the courage of looking at yourself in the mirror and saying, well, what do I have to clean up so I can show up more unconditionally loving? Because she's going to continue to destroy relationship after relationship, and both of them. And so I said the words to her, and not necessarily intentionally destroy it, but sabotage, push it away, seek out faults, whatever. So I said to her, how long are you going to continue to make other people suffer for the areas of your life that you refuse to heal? I thought she'd never call me back, but she called me back. So, okay, we got someone to work with. This is great. And now it's beautiful. And they're in this beautifully, like, mutually respectful relationship in which now they have courageous conversations around, okay, this is triggering this wound. And, you know, I know that you may be sure, I know you have a lot going on this week, but, you know, what I need is a bit more grace and compassion while I'm still tending to this wound. It just feels a little heavier this week, you know, all sorts of conversations where he's like, okay, I'm naturally going into this place of blame. I just want to check in, like, you know, can we have a discussion? How can both of our needs be met here? Because there's something not aligning. I'm not feeling good. I'm feeling less than. So all of a sudden it's opened up the door for deeper, more beautiful, more respectful communication. And so again, yeah, when you go into the how, it's identifying how do we actually, or which areas of our life are we in a state of disempowerment, or is our own sense of self being violated? And then the follow-up is, how do my own insecurities, my self-perceived inadequacies, shame, all of that, how is that impacting the sense of self of someone, or how is that contributing to the violation of someone else's sense of self? Because we cannot heal if we are doing one and not the other.
I love that so much. And also it just brings me back to, I was reading on your website earlier about how you talked about, like, it being an uncomfortable journey into the unknown, and I loved that because, again, I always say, like, this deep work isn't just for anyone. Like, there has to be a level of devotion to, like, that deep self inquiry and the willingness to look in the mirror, like you were just talking to. So yeah, I really feel that's, like, so important for women and men, if you're working with men as well, to know, like, it really does take courage and I think vulnerability, as you were just speaking to.
And it's so, I love what you said, again, going back to loving back to wholeness, because in our childlike state where we're not given this information, we're not taught about it in school. Again, there's industries profiting billions of dollars off of our disempowerment, and that's not knowing the truth of our core essence. That woman spent so many years of her life believing she was deeply unlovable and unworthy because of not even realizing that the father had so much shame. You can only come up to be able to blame, to you know, all of this stuff. You're coming from a state of shame. It's not making it better. The man had a horrific past when we started diving into it. And things that he had to endure. It is not surprising that he was in such a state of pain that he had to escape. It's not making it right or wrong, of course not.
Yeah.
But it's realizing, again, we rely on someone else's opinions of us to deem our worthiness. And in that state, it can never be satiated. It can never be enough. The only truly sustainable way of deep joy, of pleasure, of happiness, of inner peace, it's when we get to this point and cross a threshold in which all of that approval, that love, that enoughness is sourced internally.
I love that so much. It feels like the perfect place to end because I think we're coming up on time. But yeah, I absolutely love that we're ending on love, especially given we're recording it today on Valentine's Day. I know it won't be released today, but yeah, I'm such a big believer that it is really about us learning to love all the places of ourselves that we have outcast. So thank you for that. That all feels gorgeous. I would love to, just before we complete, to ask you to share a little bit more about how people can find out about you and your work, and whether there's anything that you're working on that you'd like to share.
Thanks, Nicole. So as I mentioned, I have a very specific but very contrarian approach to this work. So I ask for an incredibly high level of commitment from people because they get a shmealer in their corner every second of the day. And so what we do, and I don't know if we didn't talk about it at the beginning, but I've made up my term for myself, but it's shame healer. And so people can go to my website where there's that questionnaire. It's hard hitting. It will make you feel deeply uncomfortable and have you face some very real truths in your life. If that's something that resonates, we will have a call to see if it's a right fit. And then from there, we do a full day in person where we get to the meat of all of this. And then, yes, there's obviously the follow-up calls from there. So if anyone is interested in that, my website is sarahLajeuness.com. I assume we could probably throw that in the show notes.
Exactly.
But yes, that's how I do my work with.
Excellent. And what about socials? Are you on social?
I am, yeah. Sarah.Lajeuness on Instagram. And I mean, that's really the only one that I'm active on.
Perfect. Gorgeous. Well, thank you. I have loved this call. It's just so much synchronicity. Well. Yeah, no, it's been gorgeous. Exactly. So thank you. That felt like such an authentic episode. Here are my takeaways. Shame is a state in which someone feels unworthy, not enough, and unlovable as they are, and it requires them to seek approval and validation externally. Our guilt and shame affects all of us. We can't compartmentalize it. Same shameful beliefs show up everywhere, from the bedroom to the boardroom and everywhere in between. We aren't meant to suffer through life. We are meant to feel deep pleasure, joy, and happiness, and inner peace and confidence. We are born in love, and this core essence of who we are over time gets blocked and disconnected by deep layers of shame and guilt. The weight of the shame and guilt that we can carry can be so detrimental to our lives as we create from there unconsciously. Where you think people hate you is actually where you hate yourself. Shame is self-harming, and when we aren't aware that this is what's happening, it can be exhausting. There is no quick fix for shame. It requires of us to go deeply into our unconscious beliefs from childhood and identify where our worldview has been created unconsciously. If you'd like to get the show notes and links for everything we've chatted about in this episode, head to www.secretwitch.co.uk. If you know a secret witch who would love this episode, please share with them to help them liberate themselves. And so you don't miss out on next week's episode, head to your podcast app of choice and hit subscribe. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next time.